Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of AWS Cloud Path. My name is Elizabeth Adegbaju and I'll be your guide. So today we will be focusing on building an AWS web server. Just a web server, but it's on AWS anyway. So yes, we're building a web server, and I like to think of it as building a web server the hard way, because ordinarily you wouldn't be building a web server or deploying a web server in this manner, but it's essential for us to get familiar with the AWS console, know what services are available for us, how they really work, and then we can explore building it's the, let's say, the simpler or more straightforward, the best practice kind of way. Yeah. So today we'll be using the AWS 101 workshop. There's a lot of different workshop content that you have available on AWS website. Let me show you this. AWS, oh no, workshop.aws. You can check it out, and oh, this is wrong spelling. You can check it out and explore all the things that they have available there. I'm coming out. It's workshops.aws. Yes. So there's a lot of content on different domains and different levels. You see there is a level on each workshop, so you can know which ones are matching your level and which ones aren't. You can see the level 400, level 300, 100. The one we are doing today is actually level 100. It's very beginner level-ish. It's the intro. This is it, level 100. So 100 means very simple and straightforward. And that's what we're working on today. So this is the workshop, and it's going to be very detailed and explanatory. I haven't implemented it myself. I mean, I have deployed web servers, but not through this very click ops ish way, like clicking through the console. And yes, I would like us to work through it together, and I'll be explaining things as I go, and breaking down like things that may be more complex or simple instructions that you may want to know the why behind them. Yes. They said it takes 1 to 2 hours to complete. I hope we can achieve it in less than an hour, even with all the explanations that we're adding to it. It's not totally free because we'll be deploying some instances. So if you're going to try it yourself, I'm sure you would have seen this, but let me make it bigger so that you can see everything that I'm saying here. Yeah. But it's really negligible, less than 50 cents, and I'm thinking that you should also be able to run some without incurring costs in a new account. But yes, just make sure to check with that before you get started. And yes, let's go. So the first thing we have here is the architecture of this project that we're going to build. I am guessing you may have seen images like this, and if you are interested in architecture, you're familiar with it. And if you aren't, then you haven't tried to make sense of all the icons and everything you see there. I'll try to make it quick. But it's very important for you to understand the architecture of whatever it is you're trying to build. It will save you a lot of headaches, and also some troubleshootings that you'll be doing would be very, very clear, like from the beginning. All these boxes and squares and rectangles, they have meanings, and it's important to put the right thing in the right place. If not, you'll be looking for it when you want to connect something to it. So I'm going to start with the what they call this outermost shell, which is the one that has AWS logo at the corner there. Every of the boxes or the rectangles or squares that you may see, they are labeled. There's a labeling, and when you go deeper into AWS architecture, it even gets easier because you understand the color coding, the kind of what do you call this? The kind of lines that are there. You understand it at a glance what this means or what this color or this icon stands for. But without further ado, let's get started with this one. So here in this thing, I'm coming. I want to get my, yes, I'm gonna get my, yes. So I don't know if you can see what I am writing or not. Okay, let me just clear it and get started again so that yes. So here, this outermost shell is the AWS environment. That is, just think of it like AWS worldwide, and you can look at it like your AWS account, like whatever it's just the free AWS space where everything, all the resources that are in AWS that you have access to are staying. And within them, they are usually classified even further by region, by zones. If you were with us last week, you would have seen we talked about the AWS global infrastructure, and this is a good example of deploying your applications like with good knowledge of the AWS global infrastructure. So here we have one region, that's this one. You can see we have the outermost shell encasing this blue, or is it teal, yes, with the dashed square, dashed rectangle actually, and it has a flag. That's the region that we are deploying all our services in. We are deploying everything in the same region because, I mean, that's what makes sense. If you want to go like maybe higher availability, you can do multi-region deployments, but that's like deploying a whole setup in one region and also making a copy of that same kind of setup in another region so that it will be available if one region goes down. But we don't need that level of availability here. And within our region, we have two availability zones. You can see availability zone 1, and we have another availability zone here. The availability zones, like I said, they're like a cluster of servers or resources inside a region. If an availability zone goes down within a region, the other availability zone is still available, except if something happens to the entire region. I'm talking about the physical locations now in AWS, data centers and all that. One availability zone has the resources in one location together. So in AZ1, I'll be saying AZ to represent availability zone. In AZ1 here, we have resources deployed, and then in AZ2 we also have resources deployed there separately, and this is a form of high availability, or you can say redundancy, whichever one, but it's just making sure we have a higher level of availability for our setup, for our environment, so that it wouldn't all go down once and for all. It wouldn't all go down once and for all. So in each availability zone, we have one public subnet and one private subnet. And subnets like encapsulates like resources in its own subnetwork. I think that's the best way to put it. Like when you are defining a subnet, you have to define, okay, these are the IP addresses that are going to be available to assign to resources inside this network and all that. So you can have multiple subnets inside one VPC. You can have subnets in this availability zone, subnets in that availability zone, all of that. You can have that inside one VPC. I think if you don't understand any of the services or any of the resources or any of the terminologies that I'm mentioning, you can always drop it in the comment, or you can just Google it, look it up. AWS has like very, 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 very robust documentation on everything, and also it would still be touched on as we go in the actual development of the servers and everything. Every single thing we're using here would be elaborated, and you see how they really work. But I'm trying to explain why it's all looking like this. So we have this separation in the networks. This virtual private cloud that you see, this one here that is color purple, can you see it? This one, it is the it's like a basically it's a virtual private cloud. That one, when you're defining it, you define the networks, the subnets that are available inside the virtual private cloud, or the IP addresses, or the basically isolating resources separately. So you can have multiple VPCs inside your environment, and for any resource in one VPC to be able to communicate with another VPC, you have to explicitly define the connection between them, which we won't be going into, but there are different ways you can connect VPCs. But the point is, it isolates your resources, it isolates whatever you are deploying within AWS. Now, all this isolation, all this security, everything we're talking about, we need some way to make them work. Your VPC has two endpoints here that you can see, or let me not say endpoints. You can see the this one, the VPC endpoints. What this is that it's a way for you to connect resources in AWS environment with your own resources. Like Amazon S3, for instance, it's not you that owns Amazon S3 in your private account, but you are able to, send resources to and from S3 without having to go through the public internet space. So when you configure VPC endpoints for your resources, then you are able to communicate with them directly without going to the public internet. So what you every resource that has that let's say that feature or that function, you have to configure like VPC endpoint for S3, VPC endpoint for this, VPC endpoint for that. So Internet Gateway, on the other hand, is exactly what it does. It's what it says. It gives access to the internet. You can see this internet cloud here, and then there's the internet gateway that is connecting to. But you can also see two other arrows from here and from here that are able to connect to the internet. Please take note of the direction of the arrows. It's very important. The internet is only able to come into your environment through the internet gateway, but it's not able to, this other arrows that you're seeing is not able to come into your environment through those arrows. It's only coming out to the internet. Connections are only coming out to the internet. So yeah, we'll be looking at that. So there's the public subnet, there's the private subnet, and they're exactly what they say, public and private. Public means it can communicate with the external world, with the internet. Private means it cannot communicate with the internet directly. So it's communicating through the public subnets, and there's a NAT gateway that is deployed there such that it grants access to the outside world, but not access back in. The direction of the arrows matter. Every time you're looking at your architecture and all that, pay attention to all the little details. The subnets, all the CIDR block, that's the IP address ranges that are written there, they're all important because you don't want them overlapping, you don't want this. So always pay very close attention to whatever architecture that you're working with. A lot of times you're working with people and you see that the questions that they come back asking, or the questions that they are lost on, are actually already very clear in the architecture if they just went back to look at it one more time. So yes, we have that. And you see our web server is deployed inside the private subnet. We also see that we have an application load balancer that is deployed here to balance the load across the web servers. I see that we only have one web server, but I mean, we'll get to see what we're actually building in the end. But application load balancer is also a way to expose your private servers, because you don't want them, they don't have public addresses that you give to the internet people to connect, like all your users. But when you connect your application load balancer to your private server, because that's in AWS environment, and they are able to connect to your load balancer, and your load balancer would connect to the server. Nobody's connecting to your server directly like that. So you see the application load balancer is inside a security group, and the web server is also inside a security group. with the same colors that they are. I see that this is red and this is also red. They're security groups basically. And what this does is it limits who can access the resource that is inside the security group. All the resources that are inside the same security group can connect easily with each other, but you can restrict, okay, if I want this other security group resources to be able to connect with this one, you grant access to it. That's what I see with this arrow. You've granted access to the web server, and then the web server is able to communicate to the S3 here through the VPC endpoint and all that. So all the connections, all the networking, everything has been planned out well here, if you ask me. The web server has its way to connect to the internet has its way to connect to the web server. That's through the internet gateway and the application load balancer. And the web server also has its way to connect to S3 through the VPC endpoints. And all of this is well planned out, and now we need to implement it in the AWS environment. So I think we can move on now. Let me clear all of this. But yeah, I think we can move on now with where we are. So the next thing would be to go to, okay, this is just talking about how you would want to work with your workshop, because you would be taking instructions from here and implementing it in the console home. So there's advice to split your screen or to have a second screen where you'll be showing everything. I think I would just be changing between the tabs like this. Or let's start and see how we go. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I would say there are basically 9 major steps that we need to complete in the next 40 minutes, and I hope we can get through all of them. I'm guessing not, but at least we'll be able to cover the most important parts and have it live, I guess. So here is the instruction. We're going to be building this website, and you may not have full grasp of all the concepts, all the services, how every single thing works from here, but by the time you're done with this, you should be familiar with, navigating the console and, finding the services, what the VPC is. Just at least you will know what they are. And the more you use them, the less you would need to come to the documentation or come for reference in the workshop to implement them. Here we are, starting with the VPC. As you can see, this is the outermost one that we talked about the other time. I don't know if you can see my screen. I'm guessing you can. Yeah. So this is the outermost one that we talked on the other time. AWS service. And so our goal is to deploy our services within this VPC, within the security groups, the subnets, and all of that. And the first thing we're going to do is set up our VPC. So we have the instructions clearly here, and we're going to follow it step by step. So the first thing is for us to find our VPC in the Amazon console, and then we would create the VPC using the VPC wizard. It's an interactive experience to create the VPC, and this is what the preview is going to look like. Let's get started with that. We come here, you search for your VPC. It's pretty straightforward if you ask me. And then you press create VPC. So when you look at the workshop, it may not look exactly like what you see. You can see it's all squared out and all, but it's as close to recent as it can get. There have been changes in the environment recently. So yes, you can see the preview. That was what was shown to us. This is the preview of what it currently is, the default kind of experience. There's the VPC and the subnets that are being deployed by default, and the route tables for each subnet has its own route table. The public subnets in both availability zones, you can see EU Central 1A is an availability zone in EU Central 1 region, and EU Central 1B is an availability zone in EU Central 1 region. Yes. So each of them have route tables. You can have the same route table catering to more than one subnet. Like we have here, we have the two public subnets using the same route table, and there's the subnet for the privates, the subnet for the other privates in the other region. And basically this is just a preview. As you are changing things here, you'll be able to see it's like in the preview, like live. So are we making any changes? No. Each subnet is connected to a route table, like I said, and they are connected to the internet gateway. So here you will see these networks that we saw here. The IGW stands for Internet Gateway, and there's the VPC endpoint for S3. These are the things that are shown in our architecture. So as we're implementing it, we are seeing our architecture already come to life. From this setup for our VPC environment, we have most of our networking already sorted out. Not all of it, because you need to configure your security groups like by yourself and all, but most of it is already coming together like this here. And we have the default VPC settings provide a good starting point with the two availability zones and the public and private subnets like we want, with the internet gateway, the VPC endpoint setup, and that is fine by default. But we also need to set up our NAT gateways. Remember, in our architecture, we needed NAT gateway deployed in the public environment, so that anything that we deploy in our private, we can connect it to access the internet through the NAT gateway, but the internet will not be able to access our resources in the private subnet. This is something that you would really want to understand very well, why and how it works, but I don't know if we have all the time in this particular session. Maybe we can go deeper into the networking part of that, but for the use case of this, it works as expected. The NAT gateways, we're going to pick one in each availability zone. Anywhere you see AZ, we're referring to availability zone. And someone said that you can't see the screen that I'm sharing. I think that must have been an issue with the... I'm coming. The screen I am sharing is... Yeah. A moment. I'm going to update that.